Welcome everyone to our Tanya class. We're up to chapter 10, and we're doing it through Tanya, which is an incredible instructional book of how to delve deep inside and not necessarily how to be perfect, but the point of the Tanya is really how to do perfect. So I've actually taken some time now that, thank God, everyone is able to have a lot more time with so many things stopping. So what I would like to do, let me just hold on 1 second. Okay. All right. What I would like to do is give a little review on what we've learned so far, and hopefully use that as a springboard to have a better clarity. Because we're up to chapter 10, which is an incredible part of the Tanya. So I'm just going to give a little review of what we've learned, and hopefully with that empower ourselves to delve deeper and go further. So there are books that are instructional, and there are books that are very informational. But even a book that's very instructional, you first need the information, you need the vocabulary of how to use it in life in order to make it practical. So you need a worldview of understanding a certain vocabulary in order to then apply it in avodah, in a service, and how to use this information in our work and our relationship with God, in our service that we are intended to do. So for example, if a person is going to medical school, you first need to learn anatomy in order to be able to succeed in what you're going to be taught in medical school. So you first need the lingo, you need the language, you need the anatomy. So chapters 1 through 8, like I've mentioned before, we learned the important information that will help us in our instruction that begins from this chapter that we're up to, chapter 9, and on in chapter 10. So we're going to give a little review on the previous chapters and hopefully really utilize that to get a clarity in where we're holding in the Tanya, because we've been learning a lot of words, and now it's where it all comes together. So in chapter 1, we learned 3 general terms. And that's really the thesis of the Tanya, is based on understanding what is a tzaddik, a rasha, and a beinoni. A tzaddik literally means a righteous person. A rasha is literally a wicked person. And a beinoni is an in-between person. The name of the book Tanya is actually called, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he actually called the book Sefer Shel Beinoni. He called the book of the in-betweeners. So the basic definition of tzaddik, rasha, beinoni, the way it's in the world, is just based on how you would be seen in court. If you were taken to court, would you be considered a righteous person, meaning vindicated? Would you be considered a guilty person, means a rasha? Or would you be considered a beinoni, somewhere in between? You're half wicked and half righteous. But over here in the Tanya, in chapter 1, the Tanya is giving a more Kabbalistic approach and a mystical explanation on what the term tzaddik, rasha, and beinoni is defined as. And it's based on a Zohar. The Zohar is the basis, the cornerstone book of Kabbalah, of Torah, the mystical dimension of Judaism. And according to the Zohar, the tzaddik, rasha, beinoni, the righteous, the wicked, and the in-betweener, is actually based on the character of the person, not on how they would be seen in court, but delving into the actual character of that person. And the entire book of the Tanya is to enlighten us on these 3 terms, and more specifically, how we, each and every one of us in the world, how we can each be a beinoni. Because to be a tzaddik, to be a righteous, is absolutely beyond most of our abilities. In fact, we don't even have a book called the Book of the Righteous. According to what we understand, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he actually wrote a book for the tzaddik. It's called the Book of the Tzaddik, the Sefer Shel Tzaddikim, but it was burnt in a fire. There were many of his works, his writings, and actually some of the code of Jewish law, some of the Shulchan Aruch that he wrote, which is extremely precious, they were burnt in different fires. So in one of these fires, the book that he wrote exclusively for tzaddikim was actually burnt. So we don't have that book. Apparently, it wasn't for our generation. And the reason is because a tzaddik is a person who doesn't have any desire of sin. He doesn't have any impulse or urge to do negative, to do bad. A rasha is someone who is weak and he can't control himself. The Beinoni, which is the theme, the main character that we're going to be learning about in the Tanya, is someone who has the impulse to do wrong, but he is able to control himself. He may slip at times, but he has the power to control himself. The point of the Tanya is to explain to us how to control ourselves. That maybe we can't be perfect, meaning inside of us we're not fully perfect. We have maybe a drive or an impulse, an inkling and an urge to do negative, but we are able to do perfect. We're able to control ourselves, that in the way we act and the way we communicate, perfection is able to be attained. And the way it's done is how are me and you able to actually accomplish this? It seems so overwhelming of a task to always be on guard. And it's really done through 5-minute increments. The next 5 minutes, I'm able to do perfect. I'm able to control myself.
Oh, okay.
And that's really the foundation.
Of course. Okay.
And that's really one of the foundations of the Book of the Tanya. Is how to be a Beinoni. And that's really the definition of the Tanya. If someone asks you, what are you learning about? You could answer, I'm learning every Wednesday morning at 9:30. I'm learning how to be a Beinoni, which means how to be perfect. Maybe I'm not perfect inside, but it's about how to do perfect. In order to understand that, we first have to give, that's really chapter 1. But in order to understand that, we have to give an introduction into the soul of the person. And that's where chapters 2, 1 through 8 really is giving the lingo, the anatomy of the soul. And once we have an understanding of the soul, then we come into chapter 9 and 10 into learning how to apply that. Once we have the information, then we could give the instruction, the meditation on how to attain this level. So now we put on the side the Beinoni, the Tzaddik, and the Rasha. That's put on the shelf for now. And right now what we're really delving in is into understanding the anatomy, understanding the soul. So we learned a revolutionary point of the Tanya is that in fact we actually have two souls. It's the doctrine of the two souls, which is what Tanya is famous for. It's a revolution. We have two souls. One is called the Nefesh Hachiyonit, which means the animating soul. It's also known as the animal soul, but not in a very negative way. It's the animal soul because it's all about self-preservation. It's about self-interest. This soul is self-centered. It cares about itself. It's like an animal that always just thinks about what it needs and what it wants. So if it's itchy, it'll scratch itself, no matter if the surface is a nice Porsche or if it's a tree, the trunk of a tree. It's itchy now, or it's hungry now. It's just going to eat and plow whatever it needs to get through in order to get to what it wants. That's the self-interest, the animating soul that's worried about self. It's more egoic. It's more self-centered. In chapter 2, we learned the second soul, and that's the Nefesh Ho'elokit, which is the godly soul. And this soul is fully connected with God. Its whole desire and purpose is thinking about the greater good. It's thinking about what it can do for God in this world. It doesn't even care. This is a very interesting point. And just when I was researching for today's class, that this soul doesn't even care about spiritual goals. This soul, all it cares about is its connection with God. So, and to explain that, one of the very famous statements that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, was famous for saying, in a state of meditation, he would actually be found saying these words. He would say it in Yiddish. So I would say it first in Yiddish, and then I would translate it. He would be in a conversation with God, which some of you probably have a great grandmother who every now and then would, like Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, would have their conversations with God. But the Alter Rebbe's conversation with God went like this: God, ich will ze garnished. I don't want anything. Ich will nicht dein Gan Eden. Ich will nicht dein Olam Haba. Ich will mehr nicht als dich allein. God, I don't want anything. I don't want your Garden of Eden. I don't want your lights in the worlds to come. All I want is you. This soul just wants a connection with God. It doesn't even care about any spiritual divine light that it would be rewarded for. That's not what it's about. It's like a child, it wants to do right because of the candy. So the godly soul, it doesn't want to do right because of its candy, because of light. That's not what it cares about. Its whole motive is just to be in a connection with God. So that's chapter 2. It's talking about the godly soul having, it's literally a part of God that's now found in the body and the person. But this godly soul, all it cares about is this connection with God, and it wants to bring that person into this connection. So then we come to chapter 3. Now, chapter 3, once we have that doctrine of the two souls, chapter 3 of the Tanya comes and it explains to us the anatomy of these souls. Each of these two souls, they each have a same set of soul powers. Each one is given the same powers, but its own sets of them. So it's the very makeup of the soul. It's broken in each one of these souls. Right now we're going to focus on the godly soul. The godly soul has 10 soul powers, but in general, they're actually divided into two categories. They're divided into seichel, which is intelligence or cognitive, and midot, which are the emotional characters of the person. It's the ability from the mind to perceive and to cognitively focus on God. And then comes the emotions and the feelings that are developed as a result of the thinking. So it actually in the Tanya, the way the Alter Rebbe explains them is like a mother and a child relationship. The mother is what develops and births the child. So the mother is like the cognitive faculties, the way our mind is wired. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And then it develops the feelings of the heart. So the three ways that we are cognitively wired in our seichel, in our mind, is first is chachma, and actually this is obviously a very important point for Chabad, because literally the word Chabad stands for the three cognitive, intellectual faculties that we were given. There were three ways the way we think. So I want to just delve a little bit more on it. It's based on chapter 3 of the Tanya, but just to refresh our memories on it, the beginning is chachma, which in the book that we're learning in the Tanya, the way it's translated in our translation, it's called inquiry. Chachma is the creative mind. It's the intuitive mind. It's using the world around us to understand ideas about God. That's the creative mind, is chachma. And put our relationship with God on the side for a moment. Whenever we think about something, it starts with a lightning flash, with an idea, and then you analyze the idea and you make sense out of it. So the first part of it is chachma, which is the inquiry, the creating of the idea. That's chachma. The way we translate it all the time is wisdom, but I really like the translation in our book, which is called inquiry. And then comes bina. Bina is the way we always translate it is understanding, but in our book it's called cognition. This is a thorough analysis to think deeply about the idea that we just came up with. Once you have Chachma and Bina, the point of them is to be able to affect the heart and make your heart have a feeling in line with these thinkings of the mind. And the way you develop that is by thinking about an idea, thinking about it again, eventually leading to a feeling in the heart. And this is an extremely important foundation of the Tanya. It's called hitbonenut, which means either contemplation or meditation, which starts in the mind, but eventually from the mind's thinking and deep focused understanding, it'll develop a feeling in the heart. And this is an important idea. In Hebrew, the words is acharei hamoach, halev nimshach, after the mind, the heart is drawn, which means based on our thinkings, that's what you're going to be starting to feel about. So let's say with what's going on now, the panic is just what you're hearing from around, and it's getting into your mind, and it's able to develop a panic. And that's the feeling that we're getting, but it's from the way we are thinking about it. An important part is the thinking in the mind. I'll stop here just to make sure everyone's with me. For those that are not muted, just let me know that you're here. Okay.
Yes, I'm here. This is Maddie.
Oh, hi, Maddie. Great. Thank you.
Hi.
Okay. So from the mind, it develops an excitement or develops something that will continue into the heart, that will continue into an action based on the way, but it starts in the mind, from the mind to the heart, and from the heart to the outside. And in our terminology, this is called hamoach shalit alalev, which is an extremely important foundation of the Tanya, that by nature, by birth, each and every one of us have the ability of the mind to control, to dictate what our heart will feel. And it starts in the mind that develops the heart's feelings. And we all know the Shema, the second verse of the Shema, taken from the Torah, says, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, that you shall love God with all your heart. And the famous question is, a commandment on a feeling is not possible. You could command me to do something. You can even command me to say something, but you can't command me to feel something, because you can't command me to love someone. You can't command me to hate someone. It's a feeling. I can't be commanded one way or another. That's a very famous question on this verse of the Torah. And the answer is, the commandment is actually not to feel the love. The commandment is actually to contemplate. When you contemplate the Shema verse, which is the previous verse, how God is one in everything, eventually it will bring you to have a feeling of love. So once you have Chachma, which is the inquiry, then you have Bina, which is the analysis and the comprehensive, thorough understanding of it. That's how you develop the feeling of the heart. But chapter 3 tells us, introduces one last component that is so crucial. And I just want to go over this because it's going to be important as we continue Tanya. It's the third element. After we have the Chachma and the Bina, you need the Das. Das is the D of the word Chabad. After the Chet of Chachma and the B, the Bet of Bina, you come to the D, which is Da'at, which the way I've always grown up with translating it is knowledge. But in our book, I really appreciate the term used, the translation, as recognition. It's or the application of it, the experience of it. And what that means is, in order to get from the mind into the heart, it's not enough to just understand an idea very well. the idea needs to be personalized. Hold on one second. I'm just going to get some water, and I'll be right back. Take a moment of a break.
Good morning, this is Shira.
Hey, Shira, how are you?
I'm good. It's nice to hear you guys.
Hi,
Stay
Shira.
healthy. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Okay. So this das is such a crucial element. The way in the Tanya, the verse that he uses to explain the term das is actually taken from the opening chapters of the Torah, where it talks about Adam and Eve and how they gave birth to a child. After the sin in the Garden of Eden, it says these words, Va'adam yada es Chava. Adam knew, the word used as das, da, Adam knew Eve, and they gave birth to a child. So you see that the term knowledge, the term for das, is about making a close connection, which means to personalize an idea. So you may have a great idea, but that idea needs to become yours in order to have a feeling about it. That's da'at, to recognize it. The story, I think I've shared it, but it's worthwhile. I think I shared it in my opening few classes, so it's worthwhile to share again. The story of in Russia, hundreds of years ago, there was a shtetl where most of the people were farmers and were ignorant and illiterate. So there was a melamed, which was the local teacher. He was the scholar. He was the one that was able to read and teach. He was the authority that people would come to. So once a peasant received a letter, and he was unable to read it, of course, and like he always did, he went to the local teacher, the tutor in town, to get the letter read and translated. So he went to the teacher, and the teacher read the letter. And in it, he says, "I'm sorry to inform you that your father has died." And it says his name of the peasant's father. And as soon as the teacher is reading the letter, the peasant, the recipient of the letter, faints because he heard the news that his father died. And they wake him up, and the melamed, the teacher, says, "I should be the one that is fainting because I'm the one that read the letter. I'm one step closer to the experience, to what happened, than you are because I read the letter, whereas you just heard the letter." To which the peasant responded, "But it's my father. It applies to me." So that's das, where you personalize an idea. It becomes yours. And that's why in the world you can have people that are extreme geniuses, but they're lacking das, and therefore they lack maturity. They could be genius in their wisdom and depth and sharpness and wit, but their maturity level is childish because that last component of our cognitive, intellectual faculties, which is after Chachma and Bina, you need to have das. Das is the application of the idea. It's the intellectual ability to personalize it, to make it yours. And on the flip side, you can have people that are not so deep in their Chachma and their Bina, but their das is very healthy. And from their das, they're able to apply an idea and make it very real. And therefore they have a lot of maturity, and the ability as a good teacher is to explain something on a very simplistic level for everyone to be able to understand it, because their das is healthy. And that's actually why until 13 for a boy or 12 for a girl, the age of bar or bat mitzvah, that child doesn't have the obligation to do mitzvahs. Even though it could be that child at the age of 10 could be a lot smarter and is a prodigy and is a genius and is able, I don't know if you ever see on Oprah or other shows, a 9-year-old that is already accepted into colleges. Because intellectually they're very, very advanced, But that doesn't give them the maturity needed to make that idea applicable to them. And therefore, God doesn't hold them accountable until 12 or 13, because that's when their maturity should be developed enough, where it should be it should be something that they should be held accountable for. So I'm just digressing over here to the idea of das. Das is crucial, because otherwise your chachma and your bina, you can have great ideas, but it doesn't last. It's not going to be real. It's not personalized. It's like when you're burning paper. After 30 seconds, the paper is burnt. There's nothing left to it. It doesn't last. So that's chachma, bina, das. Together you have the word Chabad. That's the divine soul, how it's the mind affecting the heart. You have the three components of the mind in chapter 3, how those are affecting the feelings of the heart. And just, I don't think I shared this before. What's interesting is, if anyone has heard of Chabad before, the way we're always synonymous with is the words Chabad and Lubavitch. Chabad is based on these three ideas, but Lubavitch, if you ever heard of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is because Lubavitch is actually the town where Chabad originated in, where Chabad are Rebbes in Belarus and in Russia, where for over 100 years, that was the seat of the Chabad movement for over 100 years until around 1917, I think, where they had to flee with the rise, with the revolution in 1917 in the Bolsheviks. But interesting to note, Lubavitch, it literally means, Lubavitch is the love. Lubavitch means the love. It's talking about the feelings of the heart. There's actually a beautiful connection of Chabad from the mind to Lubavitch to be able to affect the heart. Then we come to chapter 4, which continues what we know already, that once we have that soul, that divine makeup, that anatomy of those 10 soul powers of our godly soul, but now we continue with those 10 soul powers is actually not really helpful unless you have an interface of how to communicate that. How that soul is now used in the world. So I guess the way I would explain it is, you can have a hard drive, but you need a soft drive. Thomas, does that fit in with engineering? I'm not sure, but you have the hardware and then you have the software. The hardware is our 10 soul power components, but then the software is how that's being used.
It's a good analogy, yes.
Okay, thank you.
It works.
Okay, so the way it's used in Tanya is the three clothes of our soul. The way our soul is a clothes is through thought, speech, and action. Machshava, dibur, and maisa. These three is really what the main theme of the Tanya is going to be talking about. That the main thing of Tanya is our soul may not be perfect inside the way we're hardwired, but each and every one of us have the power to be able to control our action, our speech, and even what we are thinking about. We are able to control what we're thinking about. The way I gave the example before is our soul may bring us pop-ups. Like I explained, if you buy a new computer and you need to install different virus protection and malware filters, and sometimes a pop-up will come up. So that pop-up is, let's say, a thought, an impulse that's coming up, and that's from the way we're hardwired. Well, we're an idea that we have, an urge of a feeling of the heart, but it's it's in my control to either think about this idea more, speak about this idea, or act on this idea. And in terms of a computer, what that would mean is clicking on that pop-up that is inappropriate, or Xing out of it. And that's in my control. The pop-up, maybe I can't control from it coming up on my screen, but the ability to X out of it and ignore it and think about something else, go on something else, that is within our ability. So that's called the clothing of our heart. It's outside of the soul, like clothing is. And that can easily be changed like clothing. And I could change my speech to be from this to be to that. I could change my action. And it may be hard, but if you take it in 5-minute increments, you could see that you are able to control what you're going to speak for the next 5 minutes. That's a Beinoni, is someone who's controlling their thought, speech, and action. And the clothing of our soul, we explained of the godly soul, is that it's using its thought, speech, and action to do mitzvahs. That it's going to act on a mitzvah, it's going to speak positive things, and it's even going to think on things that are bringing itself in a closer connection to God. That's the clothing of the soul. And then we continue to chapter 5, which is more internal, that not only is it clothing, which is more on an outside of us, it's almost like food that we ingest. Food is something that becomes part of us. It's much more of an internal personalizing of it. And that's, on a spiritual level, that's actually when you study Torah. When you study Torah, your connection with God is not remaining just like clothing, which is a connection with God, but it's more of a general outside. The way we're learning Torah, it's actually ingesting and it's actually connecting our soul, our godly soul, with God on a much deeper, intimate, united way. And that's actually the whole soul wants, is to be connected with God. So it wants its thought, speech, and action to be involved in doing a mitzvah, to be involved in studying Torah, because by doing that, it's actually 100% being connected with God. And then from there, we flip to chapter 6. And I think Maddie was reading this when we were learning it. It comes to a very interesting part of the Tanya, where it actually tells us that similar to the anatomy of the godly soul, you also have the anatomy of the animal soul, the animating soul, that it also has the 10 soul powers, a same set of 10, that what it's thinking ideas, and it's going to affect those ideas into the heart, into the feelings, and it's going to want to act on these ideas using its interface of its thought, speech, and action. The animal soul also has that. And what we explained, and this is the point I wanted to get to, is that according to Tanya, there's actually nothing neutral in the world. There's nothing, in kosher, we have meat, we have dairy, and we have pariv. Pariv is the in-between. Like fish and eggs, it's pariv. It's not meat, it's not dairy. It could be eaten with either or both, with meat or with dairy. But according to Tanya, there's nothing neutral in the world. Either something is purely holy, and if it's not purely holy, like a mitzvah, then it's actually, the word in Aramaic that's used from the Zohar is it's actually sitra achra, which means it's already on the other side. It's already unholy. And there's nothing neutral. Either it's used for holiness or it's not holy. And once it's not holy, it's being used by the animal soul because it's something for self. I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. What am I thinking about? I'm thinking about myself. I'm tired, I'm going to sleep. What am I thinking about? I'm thinking about I'm tired, I want to sleep. But those unholy things, in truth, could actually be used 100% for holiness. Because if I'm thinking that when I'm hungry, I'm going to eat in order that I should have patience to come home and be a better husband and a better father, or be more patient with what I need to do, and to go to work in order to earn money, to put food on my table, in order to have a shelter, and in order that I should be able to give charity, you're actually using something that was just regular things in the world, but you're actually using it for the sake of holiness. So everything, almost everything, that it seems neutral is actually able to be used for Torah, for mitzvot, for godly purposes, from the gas that I'm using to drive. And it doesn't only have to be I'm going to synagogue with that gas, I'm going to work, but your mindset, your agenda it could be a very positive agenda, and that actually transforms everything. It's from the mind. I'm using this, I'm doing this for a sake that is very genuine. And from there, that's chapter 6. We go into the microcosm, which is the godly soul and the animal soul. Then we go to the macrocosm, which is more in the world of how it's being used in the world. So it's a dichotomy of good and evil. where from chapters 2 to 6 is the dichotomy of good and evil within me, my godly soul and my animal soul. But then 7 and 8 is that dichotomy of the good and evil, the way it's existing within the world, the way it is around me. This existence of good and evil that exists around me in Aramaic, in the Zohar terminology, is called klipas noga, which literally means klipa is a shell, it's a husk, it's something that's not holy. But klipas noga means it's a shining klipa, which means it's called shining because it's transparent. It's neutral. That means it has the potential to be lifted to holiness. So if you have a cup that's transparent, or you have water that is transparent, you could see the water inside, which means right now it's being covered by a shell, but I could actually take what's inside of it and elevate it to holiness. So when I eat, I could take the meat and the wine and whatever else that I'm ingesting to be used for a mitzvah, to be used for studying the Torah, to be used to be patient at home, to be used to go to work and have the energy in order to be able to provide for my family. All that is using it for a proper purpose. So you're taking what's klipa, but you're actually elevating it. So that's in our terminology, the way we explained it in chapter 7 and 8, it's redeemable klipa. It's klipa that is able to be redeemed and elevated. But then there's also irredeemable. It's translucent. It's not something. It's opaque. It's not something that's able to be redeemed. And that's what's forbidden according to Jewish law. There are things that are forbidden, like non-kosher food, for example, or unkosher relations, immorality. That's something that is forbidden, because that's something that we can never elevate. There's nothing in there that we can engage in and elevate. Once we have all that down pat, I hope that was clear, then we come to chapters 9 and 10, which is what we're up to. And chapter 9, it begins the instruction. Once we were given all that information of klipas noga and redeemable and irredeemable and the godly soul and the animal soul and the tzaddik, the Rush, and the Beinani, we asked in the chapter 1, what is a Beinani? In the chapter 1, we said that there was a great sage of the Talmud. His name was Rabbah, and he said that Rabbah, I'm a Beinani. And his student says, if you're a Beinani, who are we? So we were trying to define what is a Beinani. And now comes chapter 9 and 10, where it's going to take us into the deeper understanding on a mystical dimension on what is the tzaddik, what is the Rasha, what is the Beinani. And in chapter 9 is based on a verse of King Solomon that says that the analogy of two kings that are fighting for control of a city. And they're fighting for complete control. Each wants the people, the subjects of the city, to obey just them and not the other. One king we're going to see is going to be the animal soul, or the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. According to the Zohar, according to Kabbalah, it's actually referred to as the older king. It's referred to as the older king because it's actually first that comes into our body. When we are born, our animating soul is what's giving us life, what's helping us breathe and giving us our personality. That's the first soul that we are given, the animal soul, the animating soul, the existing soul, nefesh achionet. The godly soul only comes a bit later. It starts when a baby girl is named at the Torah, or given her Jewish name, or for a boy by his bris. And it's given gradually until the age of Bar Bat Mitzvah, when it's given its complete godly soul, and it's given equal strength to fight back. That's why it's called the younger soul. But they're fighting for the small city. And what is the city? It's the body. It's the person. They're fighting for control over its thought, speech, and action, for control over its limbs. What is it going to be involved in? What is it going to be running towards? So the inhabitants are like the limbs of the person. The two kings fighting for control over the city are the two souls. It's like two people that each of them have a set of keys to a car, but there's only one car. But they each have a set of keys, and they're fighting for control of who's going to get into the car, and specifically who's going to be in the driver's seat to call the shots and to choose where to turn. So they're not fighting for the keys. They already have the keys. They both know how to drive. They're fighting for control over the car. And here's where chapter 9 gets interesting is they're fighting not only for control, they're fighting for complete control. For them, the United Nations compromises or ceasefires doesn't exist. A two-state solution is not a solution for each of these souls, because the animal soul wants nothing of the godly soul. It wants only what it wants for itself. It's not going to compromise and say 75% is for myself and I'll give 25% to God. The animal soul wants everything just for itself. And vice versa, the godly soul in a similar way wants everything for itself. So chapter 9 is now discussing the confrontation, how they're both fighting for control to get the driver's seat, to conquer the city, and to overthrow the enemy. And the city is the limbs of the person. The city, and to use more psychological terms, the city is the psyche of the person. And chapter 9, we also said that the godly soul, its main center, its main base is the mind. And from the mind, it spills over to the heart and to the rest of the body. The animal soul is based in the left ventricle, the left part of our heart. And from that heart, it rises up to have, from the feeling of the heart, it will rise up to make its mind think in the same lines and to go into the rest of the body. So this is the war. And it's a very personal war. The godly soul perceives godliness. And what is it looking for? It's looking for every opportunity to connect with God. It's not looking for anything for itself. It's looking for everything for God. So it uses its mind to assess a situation. And from that assessment of the mind, it'll develop a feeling of the heart. And either it will love doing this because it's positive in its connection with God, or it will run away from it, will distance itself, will hate it because it's not something that's going to advance my connection with God. And what it's trying to do is convince the person to have control over it. Give me the keys give me the driver's seat so I could run with it. Give me the legs, give me your legs so I can do a mitzvah. Give me your eyes so I can see the good in a person. Give me your mouth so I could speak positively. Give me your mind so I can study Torah. Give me your heart so I can have feelings that are positive. But the animal soul has the same agenda with its behavior, and it's fighting for the same car. And here's a really cool part. It's absolute, which means each one thinks that the other agenda, the godly soul thinks that the animal soul's agenda is absolutely destructive and deadly. And therefore, it wants no part of it. And the animal soul thinks that the godly soul is absolutely deadly, and therefore it wants no part of it either. And that's the tension that's going on. And like I said, neither is willing to compromise.
This is me.
I'm sorry, Vivian, is that you?
Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
No changes, meaning she still has the pneumonia.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Can everyone mute their phones if they're not
Oh, yeah,
speaking? Because there's a lot of
Maddie,
interference.
yeah, no problem. I actually could mute people from my end also. So I
Thank
muted Vivian, I think that's fine. So, okay, I said that. So now we get into explaining
I can't hear you. Oh. Rabbi, if you're still talking, we can't hear you.
All right, sorry about that, everyone. I hope you're all able to hear me again. My internet seems to have gone out, but I'm back.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Okay, thank you. So here, and the last part of this chapter of Tanya was, I think, something that I kind of we went quickly over last week of chapter 9. It's actually just 6 words in Hebrew after explaining that that godly soul is fighting for full control, that the godly soul wants absolute oneness with God, and there's a meditation that the godly soul is having in developing its love for God. We said there's 2 types. There's the ahava, the love that comes like a flaming fire. And Maddie, I think you were reading this last week. It's a fiery love that's so passionate, and it has that fire because it's far away. And when someone is far away from the person or the thing that they love, they have a yearning for it. It's like a fire. But then there's an even higher level of love. So it's when they feel distance from their relationship with God that they come to this fire. Their godly soul feels that it needs it. It wants a connection with God, and it's like a fire. But then you also have a much more tame and controlled love. It's called ava betanugim, an ava that is of pleasure, which is synonymous with water, which is a colder type of love. And that's a love that when you're in the moment, when you're with the person who you love, you're fully there. You don't have a yearning for them because you're there. You're basking in it. You're present. And that's a much higher love that you're able to attain through this godly soul. And that's what it wants. It wants this intimate connection and bond with God. And interesting, one more thing that we actually quoted in chapter 6 is that it's only able to experience this love, this oneness and connection only when it's in this world, which means in the higher worlds, it's able to have a pleasure and a delight of God, but it's observing it. It's not fully in it. It's observing it. So therefore, there's there's the soul observing it, and there's the light that it's enjoying, and that's the way the godly soul is experiencing it up there. But in this world, the experience is very personal. It may not be as intense, but it's you observing it. It's you that's in it, and therefore you're able to actually reach a much higher level. The final thing I need to get to, there's actually a lot more, but we'll suffice with this. At the end of the chapter, there's almost like an asterisk. There's a star where it flips the conversation from the godly soul wanting this connection to God, and the animal soul is wanting what it wants. That it's fighting for control, where the godly soul is trying to get the person to fully surrender and be humble to God. And that's the dream of the godly soul. The animal soul wants the exact opposite. And this is where we quoted at the end of chapter 9 a story from the Zohar that really is so telling. It's such a powerful story. The animal soul is what it's telling us at the end of the chapter is the animal soul is actually underneath the surface, is actually also on board and in line with what the godly soul wants. It's like children that are, if you have a 5-year-old on Erev Shabbat on Friday afternoon when things are busy in the home because there's a bunch of guests coming over, And the 5-year-old child says, what could I help with in the kitchen? The best help, I'm going to say this maybe off the record, is for the child to actually just stay in your room while we order. It's more disruptive having a child trying to help and making a bigger mess. So in the same way, the animal soul, it's disrupting things, but in truth, it's really trying to get you what's trying to do the right thing. And the way the Zohar explains this is with a very olden day type of example, like every story of the Midrash, right? And the Zohar is a story of a king. And the king is referring to God, obviously. But in the way of the story, it's a king who has a child, a prince, who's his only child, and wants this child, this teenage boy, to become a man. So it wants to give this child, the king wants to give this child a test that it will make a man out of him, put him in a compromising situation where it would be tempting for him to give in, and that he should be able to prevail and not succumb to it. So he hires a woman of an ill reputation. In the words of the Zohar, she's a zona, which means a harlot. And he hires her to try to tempt him into succumbing to immorality, to an immoral relationship. So she understands her job, but she also kind of hopes that she fails, because ultimately she wants the prince to rise higher and to not succumb. So what's her psychology? This is a very important thing. She's a loyal subject. She was given a job of the king. The job is to try to tempt the prince. And she knows she has to do her job. She has to try everything she can as a loyal servant of the king to do her job and to try to tempt the prince. But at the same time, she's also hoping that the prince succeeds in rising to the occasion. She hopes that she fails in her job. And that is the animal soul. That you think, it's a very interesting point, that the animal soul is there to hurt you, but in truth is there to help you rise to the occasion. The animal soul seems to be petty and crass and wants only coarse things and only cares about yourself. It's trying to ruin, it's giving you challenges that puts you in trying times. It makes you very vulnerable. But in truth, it's just doing its job. But the best part of it, and this is how the end of chapter 9 comes, and hopefully this will give us clarity, is that this conflict or this feeling of ay and ay vey, why God did you give me this challenging times? And it's so difficult, but in truth, this temptation, this drive, is really the working of the king to try to get you to rise to an even higher place, to try to get you to even, for your best colors to come out, for that prince to turn into a man, or in the terms of the Tanya, for the animal soul to be subdued, and eventually, the word in the Aramaic is apcha, which means for the animal soul to be actually not from being an enemy in the kingdom, to become an ally, and to become your greatest asset. That your animal soul, what it's famous for, the animal soul is famous for its intensity. And if I'm saying too many ideas, I'm trying to put 9 chapters together over here. But the godly soul is known for its order. It's coming from the mind. The animal soul it's intense. It's passionate. It's excited. It wants. It's going to get it. It's going to do anything to plow through. And that could be very dangerous. But at the same time, if it's used correctly, it could be, if it's harnessed, it could actually be the greatest asset of your person. The example I gave a couple weeks ago in Tanya class is when you get the troublemaker in this class to take the teacher's side, he will or she will become the greatest asset in getting your class to learn so much better. So when you get that troublemaker, because the troublemaker is popular, the troublemaker has a voice, that's the animal soul. It's a troublemaker. But if it's used correctly, it could be the greatest asset, the greatest ally, the greatest influence for your godly soul. That instead of just doing everything of the godly soul in a very orderly, cold fashion, the animal soul has that intensity and passion that could be needed and in our service to Hashem. So in chapter 9, it's the fight, and the ultimate goal is that even the animal soul wants you to succeed. It's just very hard, but eventually you could subdue it and even transform it. In Aramaic, the word is itapra, into becoming a mensch, and to using it as an ally to overcome the kingdom and to take full control. All right, we'll stop the class here. I think that was already 10:30, I think. And hopefully now that'll give us a better understanding of the tzaddik doesn't need any impulse control. It already has it's already the only driver of the car. It already has full autonomy of the kingdom. The Rasha has full control to the animal soul, which means the animal soul is in full control. It's very weak in the kingdom. That the godly soul has barely any say. And the Beinoni is in that full, is where the battle is fully taking place. Where we're listening to both sides and we're trying to make the right decision. And we have two voices talking to us inside. And we're working with the impulses are there. The enemy is fighting, but we're working hard on prevailing and rising, and that's the Beinoni. So that's going to be chapter 10, 11, 12, which we just started learning last week. Is chapter 10 is the tzaddik's domain, where it's all done in a positive way, and eventually chapter 12, we'll get there in 2 weeks, is going to be where that meditation and that fight of the Beinoni, where it takes place. All right, we'll end the class there. Tomorrow evening, I'm giving a class at 7:30 on Pesach. It should be a really nice class. I'm also going to do a live class. I'll email out just about some of the things going on in the world and some perspectives that hopefully will guide and help us all during these chaotic times.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're so welcome, Don.
Thank you so much.
All the best, Ed.
All right,
Yes,
everybody,
thank you.
stay safe.
I didn't even mention a time yet. I'm not sure. I have to prepare a little more, and I'll
Okay.
bring it in. I'll text people. Bye, Steve. Bye,
Okay.
everyone. Bye, Sarah. Bye,
Bye.
Thomas.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.